Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about the return of the masculine priest. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri Filii et Spiritus Sancto. Secutor in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Amen. So, why do I say the return of the masculine priest as this tractor pulls away? My generation, we had a lot of the Godspell, Jesus Christ superstar types of priests. These were the priests of the 70s and 80s. These were the priests that were coming out of the spirit of Vatican II. These were the priests that, let's be honest, a lot of them were closeted homosexuals. We've talked about in the episode on Bella Dodd. We've talked about in previous episodes about how the sex abuse scandal that was so pervasive in the latter half of the 20th century into this early part of this century was largely a homosexual infiltration. It was homosexual clergy that went into the seminaries, because think about it, if you're in that lifestyle, it makes sense that you could want to go to a place that has a bunch of people of your lifestyle and you're all living together. So now that the seminaries are largely being cleaned out, you see a return of what we've had for centuries. Masculine men as priests. I remember as a kid, we did have some like old Irish priests. And these Irish priests were hard drinking priests. But they were like very manly. And then we had this new fad. But see, now you see like the younger priests coming out of the seminary. And we've talked about before, like kind of the rise of the phoenix of the Catholic Church in the next few decades. Yes, it'll be a smaller church, as Pope Benedict predicted, but it's going to be leaner and stronger. And part of that is because the priests that are coming out of the seminary are orthodox. You know, you look the last 40 years, a lot of those priests were teaching heresy. They were teaching lies. They were teaching heterodox things. And now a lot of them have been flushed out. In that spirit of Vatican II generation are dying, or dead. You see that the new generation of priests actually love the faith, believe in the faith, and teach the faith. I mean, shocking, right? So you've got a lot of Orthodox young priests that are bringing back a lot of the devotions. And they're no longer teaching that the multiplication of loaves was an allegory and really didn't happen. But part of that is you're getting more heterosexual priests, and part of that is you're getting more of the masculine priests, the priests that have no problem exhibiting masculine traits. And what are masculine traits? Confidence, assertiveness, leadership qualities, and then you can throw in like the outside accoutrement masculine stuff, like maybe they like to hunt, maybe they like to do archery, maybe they like to golf, maybe they like to do these things that are considered to be typically masculine pursuits. And so I think this is great. Why is this great? Well, most of these priests are Orthodox, so they're teaching Catholic sound doctrine. The other one is these are great role models for our sons. You look at boys today, a lot of them, including Catholic boys, are not being raised by a father. The father was divorced upon. We talked about it in the episode, and you can find this episode in the marriage playlist, that 70% of divorce is initiated by women in America since no-fault divorce. And if the woman is college educated, it's actually 90% of divorces are initiated by women. So you see these boys, and that's not to cast aspersions on women, I'm just quoting a fact. So you see a lot of boys that are not being raised with masculine, they're not being raised with role models in general that are men in the house. And we know all these risk factors that happen to boys that don't have a father in the family. One of them, of course, is they're not nearly as religious. We know that the number one factor for your children to have a religious faith later when they're adults is the father is practicing the faith, not the mother. They see the father doing it. But aside from that, higher risk of incarceration, higher risk of sexual promiscuity, higher risk of dropping out of school. We know all the stats. So just having these men, these male priests, being around, being a good role model to these boys is great. So if you do have a priest that, if you have a priest that teaches heterodox teaching still and crazy liturgical abuses, pray for him. You can certainly go talk to him, but we have episodes here like on how to approach a priest who is teaching heresy or doing liturgical abuses. But if you do have a priest that is a good priest, that is an orthodox priest, always share that with them, because sadly pastors in particular, but even associate pastors, but pastors get most of the feedback they get are pretty negative. So give them compliments. And remember, if any of you have any quabbles about having your kids around priests, like let's say as acolytes, as altar boys, remember that with the sex abuse scandal, even at its heyday, public school teachers, daycare workers, social workers had 10 times higher rate of abusing children than priests. The amount of priests that were accused and actually convicted, albeit way too high, let me tell you that. Okay, no one's condoning what it was. But the liberal media always depicted it as this pervasive thing, like 90% of priests were touching kids, and that was simply not true. But either way, understand that today the priesthood is different. That's not to say there aren't bad seeds around, but the tide be changing, and part of that is this return of masculine priests that are orthodox, and they are assertive, and they teach the faith, and they have a lot of, I mean, you think about like what is more beautiful. Any guy can like have sex, but it takes a real man to be like, you know what, I'm going to forsake the marital act and give that up to be a shepherd, to be a priest, to give the sacraments to people, and to live a life of chastity. That is true beauty. It's true sacrifice. It's true masculinity. And so we want our kids to be around these types of role models. Guys, post in the comments. I'd like to hear from you. Is your pastor, is he one of these, or do you still have one of those throwback pastors? I'd like to hear from you. Until next time, take care and God bless.